Erste Mal, wo ich dann von ihm gegessen habe, das war ein Stück aus dem Rücken, was ich mir extra vorher zurechtgelegt hatte.
Wie war der erste Bissen, den Sie gegessen haben? Wie hat das geschmeckt? Wie war das?
Und das Fleisch schmeckt ähnlich wie Schweinefleisch, etwas herber, kräftiger. Aber ansonsten, wenn jemand anders davon gegessen hätte, hätte keinen Unterschied gemacht. Also es schmeckt recht gut.
Imagine scrolling through the darkest corners of the early internet in the year 2001. You come across an ad that reads something like this: looking for a well-built young man, 18 to 30, who wants to be fully consumed by me. Most people would laugh it off as a sick joke, report it, or close the tab in disgust. But one man didn't, he replied. He traveled across Germany to meet the poster, and he went through with everything they discussed. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Armin Meiwes and Bernd Eugen Brands, a case that shocked the world, sparked massive legal debates about consent, and still raises questions we struggle to answer today. If you think you've heard extreme true crime before, stay with me. What unfolded step by step is far stranger and more disturbing than most people realize. Armin Meiwes was born on December 1, 1961 in Essen, Germany. He grew up in a large, isolated house in the countryside near Rothenburg in Der Fulda, a quiet, half-timbered place that looked like something from a fairy tale. His father left the family when Armin was very young. His mother was strict and controlling. She kept him close, almost smothering him. Armin later said he felt incredibly lonely from childhood. He had fantasies of having a brother who would stay with him forever, someone who could never leave. Those fantasies twisted over time. By his teens and 20s, they involved consuming another person so they'd become part of him eternally. He joined the German army at 19, served for 12 years mostly in supply roles near home, then left in 1993 to work as a computer technician. He seemed normal on the surface, polite, helpful neighbor who fixed cars, mowed lawns, even invited people for dinner. But after his mother died in 1999, the loneliness hit harder. The fantasies grew. He started exploring online forums where people shared extreme ideas, places like the Cannibal Cafe. In late 2000 and early 2001, Armin posted his advertisement. He was clear he wanted someone willing, someone who understood exactly what would happen. He got hundreds of responses, most were curious, role-playing, or backing out quickly. Armin was patient. He turned away anyone who seemed unsure or insincere. Then, in February 2001, a message came from a user called Cater99. His real name was Bernd Eugen Brands, 43 years old, an intelligent computer engineer from Berlin. Bernd lived a double life in some ways, openly bisexual, successful at work, but privately struggling with deep depression and masochistic desires. He had his own long-standing fantasies about being consumed, about giving himself completely to someone. The two men started chatting intensely. Emails, chats, they talked openly about limits, about what each wanted, about making sure it was truly voluntary. Bernd sent photos, Armin explained his house, his setup. They even discussed practical details like travel and timing. After weeks of building trust, they agreed to meet. Bernd told his workplace he needed a day off. On March 9, 2001, he took the train to Kassel Station. Armin picked him up in his car. They drove the short distance to Armin's big, secluded house in Wüstefeld near Rothenburg. Inside, they sat down first, like any two people meeting for the first time. They talked face to face. They wrote and signed a short agreement stating clearly that everything was consensual, that Bernd wanted this to happen, and that Armin was acting on his request. They went upstairs to the bedroom. Bernd took 20 sleeping pills, drank cough syrup for extra sedation, and finished half a bottle of schnapps to dull everything. With his full agreement, Armin carried out the first act they had planned, severing a private part of Bernd's body. They tried to prepare and share a small portion of it together right there in the kitchen, frying it, but it didn't go as expected. Bernd was bleeding heavily by now. He went to take a bath to clean up and rest. Armin, meanwhile, sat reading a Star Trek novel to pass the time. Hours went by. Bernd came out, still determined. In the early morning hours of March 10, he asked Armin to finish it. Armin kissed him, then used a large kitchen knife to end his life quickly by stabbing him in the neck. What followed was methodical. Armin dismembered the body carefully. He buried the skull in the garden. He stored portions in his freezer next to everyday food like pizza. Over the next 10 months, he slowly consumed about 20 kilograms of it, preparing it in different ways, sometimes with garlic and oil. He said it brought him the closeness and peace he'd craved his whole life. He even posted new ads online afterward, looking for someone else. That's what eventually led to his downfall. In late 2002, an Austrian man who used the same forum grew concerned about Armin's latest posts. He contacted police. German investigators got a search warrant. On December 10, 2002, they raided the house. They found remains in the freezer, the video recordings Armin had made of much of the encounter, the written agreement, emails, and other evidence. Armin didn't resist. He confessed everything in detail right away. He cooperated fully, showed police exactly what happened, and explained his motives. The trial began in Kassel in late 2003. It became one of the most watched and debated cases in modern German history. The courtroom saw parts of the 4-hour video, though only selected minutes were shown to judges, with media and public excluded during those moments. In January 2004, Armin was convicted of manslaughter, not murder. The court accepted that Bernd had given repeated informed consent. There were no base motives like greed or hatred. It was killing on demand. He got 8.5 years. The country erupted. How could consent make something like this legal? Prosecutors appealed immediately. A retrial started in 2006 in Frankfurt. This time the focus shifted. The video, the sexual elements, Bernd's drugged and intoxicated state that night, all suggested Armin acted for his own gratification. The court ruled consent couldn't override murder when the act was premeditated and driven by personal desires. On May 10, 2006, Armin Meiwes was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. He's still serving that sentence today. Now 64 years old, he's in a prison near Kassel. Reports describe him as polite, cooperative, even model-like in custody. He became a vegetarian years ago. He attends church services, works in the prison laundry, and has expressed deep remorse in interviews and letters. He started writing a memoir to warn others away from these kinds of dark fantasies. He's been allowed a handful of supervised day trips outside prison, always in disguise, always with officers, usually in another state so no one recognizes him. But early release requests have been denied repeatedly. In 2017, 2018, and 2020, courts ruled he still posed a risk. In 2025, after changing lawyers, he applied again. Prosecutors opposed it, and hearings were adjourned into 2026 for more review. No decision yet, he remains inside. The house where it happened, it burned down in a suspected arson fire in April 2023, so it could never become some grim attraction. More than 25 years later, this case refuses to fade. It forced Germany and much of the world to confront hard truths. Can true consent ever make killing acceptable? How does the internet connect isolated people with dangerous shared desires? Where exactly does fantasy cross into irreversible harm? Armin himself now calls it a tragedy for both lives destroyed. He says he found the eternal bond he wanted, but at the cost of everything else. Bernd Brands chose his end deliberately, but left behind family and friends who still grieve. So the next time an anonymous online message feels too strange, too tempting, too perfect, remember this story. Because sometimes the scariest thing is the person posting the ad. It's knowing someone out there is ready and willing to answer it. When we hear about someone like Armin Meiwes, our first instinct is to label him as a monster, a devil, something not even human. It feels easier that way because it creates distance between us and him. But the uncomfortable truth is that he was human, and that is exactly what makes this case so disturbing. It forces us to confront a question we usually avoid. How can a human mind reach such an extreme point? We like to believe that evil has a clear face, something obvious and recognizable, but in reality, it often hides behind normal behavior. Meiwes was described as quiet, polite, and intelligent. There was nothing on the surface that would immediately signal danger, and yet inside his mind, something very different was developing over time. Psychology doesn't explain such cases with simple words like evil or madness. Instead, it points toward a combination of factors: deep loneliness, emotional isolation, and distorted thinking patterns. Meiwes experienced long periods of isolation in his life, and that kind of emotional emptiness can slowly reshape how a person thinks and feels. For most people, loneliness leads to sadness or depression, but in rare cases, it can evolve into something much darker. The human brain begins to create fantasies, and at first those thoughts remain private and controlled. But when they are repeated over and over again without interruption or correction, they grow stronger, more detailed, and eventually more convincing. Over time, the line between imagination and reality can begin to blur, and what once seemed unthinkable can start to feel necessary. In this case, the desire wasn't driven by anger or revenge, which makes it even harder to understand. Instead, it was tied to a distorted idea of connection and control, the belief that completely possessing another person could eliminate loneliness forever. At its core, this reflects a deeply human fear, the fear of being alone. But what makes this situation even more unsettling is that another individual, Bernd Brands, agreed to it. This transforms the case from a single disturbed mind into something more complex, involving two people whose perceptions of reality had both shifted in dangerous ways. It raises difficult questions about consent, mental state, and how far human reasoning can bend under extreme psychological conditions. Cases like this also highlight the powerful role of the internet. In earlier times, someone with unusual or extreme thoughts might never find another person who shared them, but online spaces can connect even the rarest and most dangerous ideas. Instead of being challenged or corrected, those thoughts can be reinforced. When two individuals validate each other's distorted beliefs, the situation can escalate quickly. This is not about being brainless or lacking intelligence. In fact, people involved in such cases are often capable of planning, reasoning, and justifying their actions. And that leads to one of the most powerful and dangerous traits of the human mind, the ability to justify anything if it fulfills a deep emotional need. Humans have an extraordinary capacity to reshape reality in their own minds. They can reinterpret harmful actions as meaningful or destructive behavior as a form of connection. This doesn't excuse what happened, but it helps explain how something so extreme becomes possible. So the question remains, are such individuals truly evil? If evil is defined by the harm they cause, then yes, their actions fall into that category. But if we think of evil as something people are born with, the answer becomes less clear. In many cases, these behaviors develop gradually over time, shaped by experiences, environment, and unchecked psychological patterns. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is that cases like this don't appear suddenly. They are built slowly, through years of isolation, internal reinforcement, and a growing disconnect from reality. And that may be the real lesson here. Instead of simply reacting with shock or labeling someone as a monster, it's important to understand how fragile the human mind can be under certain conditions. Because the line between what we consider normal and what we consider unthinkable is not always as solid as we imagine. Sometimes it is shaped by thoughts that go unchallenged for too long, in minds that become increasingly isolated from the world around them. In the end, what makes this case truly disturbing is not just the act itself, but what it reveals about human nature. Evil does not always come from anger or hatred. Sometimes it grows quietly in loneliness and silence until it no longer feels wrong to the person experiencing it. And that idea, that something so extreme can develop within an ordinary human mind, is far more unsettling than the idea of monsters. Thank you for listening all the way through. This is one of those stories that stays with you.